All right, today I want to go over the submission form and also go over the next part of the product assignment and then let you work. Today will be the last day that I'm checking drawings, so you don't have to draw after this week. You definitely should and could draw, obviously, after this week just to get better, but obviously I won't be checking them. So project name for this one will be the product shot. The due date will be when we get back from break, so that will be April 2nd. Which is going to be a Monday. Remember, next week we are here just the 26th, and we are not here on the 28th. There are no classes on the 27th all the way through the 1st, and then classes pick up again. After this assignment, we have one more assignment left, and then our final exam. So that last assignment and exam are going to go pretty quick. Our project description, we are going to be modeling a realistic product to be used for an ad. And originally I was going to do having you do 3 products. I want to have at least 3 things in the scene, but you only have to model 2 different things. Okay, so I know I just said 3, which is 2. Okay, so that means that if you have one product and you're like, cool, I like the way this looks, you can just duplicate it, change some stuff on that one. So it's basically you have 2 that could be the same and then a third one that will be a different one. Okay, so you will have 2 individual items, and 3 items total. So what that could mean is, let's say I had, like in Cameron's case, he has a lotion. He could duplicate the lotion, change some of the stuff on the label. It's the same model, just a different texture, different color. Those 2 items are essentially the same thing, just a different color, different label. And then a third one, which would be a completely different item, like a box of soap or a bar of soap or something like that. Okay. Model 2 individual items, 3 items total. Use a photoshopped texture for the label. And Photoshop or Illustrator or InDesign, whatever you want to use for that. Okay, just as long as it's something that's not just a picture of a label. Like you can't just grab something off the internet and use that. You have to build the label yourself if you're not using the one that I'm providing. And create an appropriate backdrop and lighting setup. So with this one, we'll be doing, just like we looked at before, creating something that is more than just, here's a ground plane. It'll probably be very similar to the one we used on the last one, the text one. We'll be animating a camera. So in this case, we're going to be animating a camera, doing, sometimes you'll see a model that does like a 360, like you'll have an item in the middle and the camera will go all the way around it. We're not going to do a 360 because that's typically not used for products. We're going to be doing more like a 90 degree. We're going to start on one side and then sweeping to the other side, or maybe like a 120. Okay, we'll put camera sweep. And then we will be also creating a still image. That should be good. Mind your way, Morgan.
No, I'm just very edge.
Mountain use Photoshop, create appropriate lighting setup, animating a camera sweep, creating a still image. That should be it. Cool. So for this one, there's no planning unless you're doing your own artwork. So obviously make sure you have your own artwork if you're doing your own artwork, okay? And I'll just put that in here. Your own labels if you're not using mine. Spell labels right. And remember, they should look like labels. They shouldn't just be like a block of text and that's it, or, you know, it should look like a label. And then for the turn-ins, you'll be turning in the essentials. That should be your scenes, textures, and final item. Final movie and image. So for our movie, we'll have a camera sweep across the items. And this will be about 4 seconds. And then anytime we do a movie, we're rendering it out at 960 by 540 at 30 frames per second. Oops, my box is too short. And then for the still image, we'll have a magazine-like ad for our product. And what that means is that we're going to render out a high-res still image, and then we'll put text along the top saying what it is. Okay, you can even have text on the bottom if you want to go even a bit further. This one, because it's a high-res image, we're going to go 2400 by 3000. And if you want to know what that would be in real life units, that should be an 8 by 11 or an 8 by 10. At 300 DPI. Winter 2018. And then for our product, we have 14 points possible on this one. Make sure you put your name on these sheets. Make sure you put the class name and number so I know what class you're in. Any questions on the submission form? Yes, sir.
So it's due at the end of class on April 2nd?
Correct.
Okay. So that means we have like 3 work days left, not counting labs.
1, 2, 3, yeah, about 3.5 or so.
Okay.
Okay. Anything else? All right. Our last assignment is going to be a drone, which is going to be a very similar product as far as, you know, realistic is what we're trying to go after. We'll be taking it out of Cinema, though, and putting it in another program called KeyShot, just so you can see how these softwares work together. And you'll see how just KeyShot is an awesome software. Yep. Oh, I'll show this too. This is kind of neat. I went to a lecture the other day about what was it? Environmental architectural landscaping type of thing. And one of the things that they would do is they would try to find cool ways to introduce different patterns and stuff into nature. So what they created was they would do, where's my 3D view? There we go. don't need two of these right now, is they would create these really cool patterns like this. So this is using a cylinder that I divided into a hexagon shape, and then I use the cloner to change the scale of it. And just so you can see it a little bit better, let me take the number down to 60 and 59. That should be good enough. See that? Oops. So something like that. And then what they would do is they would vary the sizes. Let me make this a bit bigger so again we can see this better. And make that wider. There we go. So they would take something like this, which is this like honeycomb pattern, and then they would render it out. They would bring it into Illustrator, which would create vector paths. They would bring it into some other software that allowed them to like cut it. So basically they were putting it on this like big plotter cutter thing that would cut out each one of these shapes from like landscaping fabric, and then they could lay it down. This is a smaller size, but they would do it like the size of your front yard, and they would lay it down, and you would get these kind of like blotchy patterns of that as far as like where the grass would grow. It was like pretty awesome. Yeah, it was like awesome. Cool. All right, so I want to go over two things today inside this. One of them being the what the rendering stuff should start to look like, and then the other part was how do we put a liquid inside there. Okay, so I'll do the liquid first. So let's say for this specific bottle, I wanted to put a liquid inside it. Okay, now like I talked about before, this one, because of the nature of what this is, you really can't see anything inside the bottle, even with the label in here. But if I had something like my beer bottle, which I have on a layer, nope, I have it right here. There it is. My beer bottle, you definitely would see something inside there. Okay, so if that's the case, I need to obviously show that something's inside there. So I'm going to drop my glass on here. There we go. And you can see we would see right through it if I render this out. There's my beer bottle. Yes. In order to get the glass or the filler in there, I'm going to duplicate the bottle. Oops. And remember, I have my lathe and I have my spline on here. This one currently doesn't have any thickness to it at the moment. And I'm just going to hit C to actually bake it into a surface. Okay, so now it's like an actual surface on its own. If I look at the original shape, before I showed using the cloth, using that cloth surface, and then you can adjust the thickness of it. So you can see how this thickness goes inside. So if I set this back to 0, and then I go like this, that thickness is going inside the bottle, okay? As opposed to the bottle surface is here and it's pulling it out, it's going the other way, okay? So what I can do is I can take this and use that to just kind of shrink it down so that it would fit inside the bottle. Now before I do any of that, I want to get this to look like the liquid of where it would be. So if this is going to be the liquid, I'm going to put a division. So I'm going to use my cut tool of where I want that liquid to be at. So let's say I want the liquid to go all the way up to there. Now I'm just going to take the faces and just delete all these faces. Okay, and so now I have no faces up there. Now I can go to my edges. I can use the closed polygon hole. And there we go. Okay, so now that gives me one solid shape of what would be there. Now at the moment, this is going to line up perfectly with the outside of that, and that's not where the liquid should go. It obviously should go on the inside of it. So what I need to do is I need to scale down the entire thing so that it fits inside the bottle. So if I switch to my point mode, or face mode, that would work. I grab all the faces, make sure I look around to grab, make sure they're all grabbed. And if I use my normal move, then as I click and drag on these faces, it's going to push them in or out. And you can see I can just kind of nudge this until it's lined up pretty good with that. Now you may need to adjust it further, but I think that should be sufficient. Okay, like up here, it looks like maybe this needs a little bit more space. So then I'll just grab the points here and maybe just scale those out some. All right, so now I basically have one item inside of another item. So there's my beer or whatever. So I'm going to copy my glass bottle. I'm going to give this a different color there. I'll go to my transparency and give this a different color. And then I'll drop that onto that. Scoot it inside here. And obviously this has to be pretty close to lined up right, because otherwise it just won't look correct. And then it's going to take some time to tweak the materials and the textures to get it to look like the beer is actually inside the bottle. Oh, that's actually pretty close. You can see that there is definitely a fluid inside the bottle. Okay, so that would be sufficient for, this one. I'd probably adjust it because it's coming up a little bit too green on my screen at least. Okay, but now it looks like I have something inside there. Now if you looked at a commercial and they actually had like the liquid pouring out of the bottle and like going and doing something, there's a software, there are several softwares. One of the more popular ones is called RealFlow. And what RealFlow is basically a liquid simulation tool. So anytime you see liquids in commercials, that's RealFlow. So all these little droplets of water right here is RealFlow. These things is RealFlow. And so what they'll do is they'll take the model from Cinema or Maya or whatever software, they'll bring into RealFlow, have the liquid simulated, and then they'll bring it back into that software to actually render out. So all of these is just that one software that allows you to do this kind of stuff. If you've used Blender before, Blender also has a pretty nice fluid simulation software inside it. Now for just the fluids, just these things to look pretty realistic, you're looking at days and days of just calculating, where you would hit the button on the computer and the software would just go through and it would just calculate what the water is going to look like, how it's going to move, all of this stuff. Then you'd make changes, then you go back and do it again, then you make changes and do it again, and then eventually you get something that looks pretty realistic. So that's all RealFlow type stuff. It's pretty amazing. There's another one called Houdini that does fluids also. And the neat thing about Houdini is that it's an all-in-one kind of package, where RealFlow is basically just fluids. It can do objects breaking, but Houdini, you can do like a bunch of stuff. You can do like the models, you can do smoke, you can do liquids and goopy stuff. It's so interesting to watch. All right, so if you see stuff like that, that's where those things are coming from. Just for fun, I'll throw a cap on here as well, just so you can see the cap part. And remember, this is one of the reasons I like to model things right at this origin, because it makes it easier to line things up. Because I've scooted it away from there, it's kind of like away from the center, and I have to work to get that lined up. Whenever you model a cylinder, and then I hit C on this, I'm going to lower the divisions first to, like, let's say 18 or 20. 20 is good. The cylinder is actually several pieces. So there's a cap, and that's, like that. If you get that and you want to use it, you just have to grab all the points and then right-click and say Optimize. And now you can grab the points, and then they're all as one. Okay, so if I'm building a cap for this, I'm going to delete all these bottom faces here. Remember, there's stuff like the loop selection or ring selection to make your job a little bit easier in selecting things, so you don't drive yourself crazy doing that. For this cap, I want to get it as close to the original or the end size as possible before I start tweaking anything. And again, why I typically keep it right at the center so that it's easier to line this up. All right, so that looks pretty close. So now I'm going to go here to this. I'm going to add a little bevel like that. I think this bottom piece should probably come up a bit like that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab every other one of these, because if you've ever seen a bottle cap, they usually have those like little ridges on there. Okay. Now I chose 20 as an even number. If I would have chosen an odd number, I would have basically selected every other one and ended up with 2 next to each other. So you want to make sure that you don't do stuff like that. I think I'm just going to do an extrude inner on these, just to give me a little bit of a break right there. And then that might be good enough. We'll see. So I'm going to hold down Alt, smooth that out. And you'll see how I get something that looks kind of like a bottle cap in there. Oops. Why is my camera not navigating around my object? It should be. There it goes. Nope. The second I just deselect it, it goes away. There we go. So it's kind of like a bottle cap, and then I can go back into these faces and maybe just scale them inward. Like that. And I can do other stuff too, but that's, for this bottle cap, that's what I'm going to go with for the design. I think that bottom edge should also probably come in. Nope. Loop selection. I have to manually click this. Alright, so that's sufficient for my bottle cap. I could obviously tweak it further. Maybe even have it a bit bigger or whatever. Okay. So once you get your products modeled, then you can start creating the backdrop and the rest of the area. So last time when we did our text, we created a floor, like from here. You don't need to resize it because the floor is an infinite floor. So this will go on forever.
Do you want us to create a floor for our project?
Yes. Yeah, we need a floor to capture reflections and shadows and whatever else.
I found one on HDRI.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so there's our infinite floor. And then, again, we should look at different ways that we can create our product backdrops. So looking at no, not that one, like this. This one has a harsh line down the middle, and it works with the line that's right here. Sometimes you don't want to have something like that. Okay? And that one is more of that. Okay, so something like this, there's actually like a little platform here because they have that gooey stuff, and that kind of works with that. There you go. So something like this, it's a seamless backdrop, so there's nothing else there. Another seamless backdrop. Okay, so if you're creating something like we did last time, which was a seamless backdrop, you'll do it the same way. You'll create the floor, you'll create a background, and then you'll do that material like we had before, which was not color, it was just luminance. Oops. And then we had a ramp on, or a gradient on it. And this was circular, and it was the other direction. Like that. Yes, yes. I'll change the colors later and drop that onto background and drop that onto floor. And then both of these were set to frontal, so that when we rendered it, we would get that. And then you'll notice too, once you start adding in your floor, once you start adding in more of an environment, your reflections and refractions will actually pop a little bit more because there's something for them to reflect and refract in. So my beer bottle looked kind of like murky before. Well, now it's actually a bit more visible, a bit more vibrant because I have something else in the scene. Okay, so there's that. So that's how you would do, just like we did before. If you wanted to create something that had that line in there, you could stick to just having a floor, and instead of it having that material of that backdrop, you could drop a regular material on it and then just start to play with some of those settings. So set this to Beckman here. I want some reflection on the floor. I'm going to hide this beer bottle because I just don't want it to render. I'll just zoom in, I guess. All right, it's pretty grainy right now because my reflections are just so strong. There's also nothing in the very back, so I need to create something back there as well. So I can create a background here and kind of line up my items where I would want them to be, just so I can kind of preview where this is going to happen. Okay, my backdrop is this bluish color because that's, or grayish color because that's just the default. So then I could drop a new material, drop that onto the background. I'm not labeling these, but obviously you will label yours. And think about how you can mix it too. So it doesn't have to be just like a solid color. Beckman, take the roughness down some. Actually, I don't. Reflection down, roughness up. Like that. I'm going to pull that reflection down some in here and that roughness down some on the floor. There we go. So now I'm getting more of a actual like reflection in the ground. Okay, so that's another way you could do a backdrop. And then the third way you could do one is to create an actual like cave. Like if you look at this here, this is basically their item is laying on this platform that's just kind of curved and rounded. So you can create something like that as well. So if I made a plane and just kind of line this up like so, took the divisions down. Oops, like that. And then I just start tweaking what this looks like. I can create something that looks very similar to what they have there. So I just kind of shaped this into that rounded piece. I'm going to add a couple divisions, like here, like there, and then on the edges. And I just want to use these as ways to hold the shape because I need to smooth it out so I don't get these rough spots. So now that's nice and smooth. And if it didn't go up high enough, I go and grab the points and move it up. And so now instead of having, and give it a material, instead of having a solid shape, that's not the right one. This one. Now I have that, so I can take my color up, take my reflectance. That looks good. And again, my settings are low, so it's going to be kind of grainy until I crank up my settings some. Okay, so now instead of having a hard line there, I have a soft line. Instead of having no line, I have that soft line. So you can really play with the different backgrounds. So when you're looking at how you want your stuff to look in the end, look for different ways that people have set up their stuff. You may want to have that backdrop. And here, it's very obvious that the backdrop has that circular gradient in the background, and then this ground plane here is just very reflective. Same thing here, there's basically nothing in the background, and this is very reflective. This is basically just like we had before, a texture in the background with very reflective on the bottom. And this is kind of neat. They show here's the picture, here is the end result. That's really cool. Here's another one. Background has that gradient in there, and then this is just a texture. You could also use a texture for it, just dropping an image for the color like wood or plastic or whatever it is. All right, the more you start doing to this, the longer it's going to take. So just be aware of that as well. All right, so once you have an idea of what your background is going to be, then you can start adding in some lights. And the lighting isn't going to be much different from the other ones. It's just a matter of looking at what you want to be lit up. So something like this, I can see very obviously that there is a light on the right side of the bottle. There's a light about here, and then there's another light coming in on this side. So there's nothing like dead on right in the middle of this. All of the things are off to the side, using it to illuminate those pieces. All the lights that you use are typically going to be area lights, unless you're using a specific strategy to make something like a spotlight or something just to kind of bring your focus into it. But most of the time it'll be this. So there's one light right here. And the way you want to approach this is looking at the lights and looking at how the light's hitting your object. If you feel like this is going too slow, because already for me this is going incredibly slow, how I'm rendering it and I have to wait this long just to see what the rendering's looking like, okay? Don't be afraid to hide your stuff. Oil bottle there. Oops, I want that. There you go. So all my stuff is hidden right now. And you can create just a random object. Just like we did on the text when we first did the lighting for that one, we created a random object and then dropped stuff on there. So if I just put, oops, I did there. If I just put a material on here, I should be able to get a pretty good idea of what this is going to look like. So I'm going to set it to Beckman. I'm going to set the roughness down. Put the reflection strength up a little bit of roughness. There we go. And I'll even give this cylinder just some caps and a fillet. Okay, and the whole purpose of this is just to make it go quicker so that when I hit the Shift R button, that this happens much faster. Okay, so you can see like 10 times quicker where that is. So now I can look at this and say, okay, well now I want to add shadows to this so I can see what that looks like. So I'll grab my light, go to shadows, set those to area lights. I can see where the reflection's coming in here. I want that to be further to the side. So I'm going to take this light and really bring it around. Now I have to have my stand-in object, which is here, about the same size and position as my other objects. If it's too different, then this isn't really going to help me out too much. All right, so that should get me pretty close to where that's going to be. All right, so I can definitely see that there is more light hitting this side of that. These reflections are the background HDR that I have set up. All right, so that's good there. I'm going to take my light and then duplicate it to the other side and then rotate it around. Maybe pull it forward a little bit more. Now this will not get you 100% there, but it'll get you like 90, 95% there. So that's looking good. I do want to be aware of the different shadows. So looking at some of these items here, you'll see that they don't really have like a whole bunch of shadows going in all these different directions. Like this one here, the shadows are dominantly on the right, even though there's lights coming in from the right side as well. So I want to be aware of that too and turn off shadows on the directions I don't want the shadows to go to. So in this case, I've turned off the right shadows, so the left side will be more dominant. That's good. And then I'll create another light right in the middle of this. All right, I also don't want to have my lights all at the same intensity, so I may want to shrink down some of the lights. I'm going to turn the shadows off for this one. And I also may want to go to my General tab and give them some coloration. Yeah, that's fine. So I may want to give them just a hint of color, so maybe something that's a little bit orange. And you can see how much quicker this is going. We have some pretty decent light set up just based on this. Now it is getting a little bit too hot right in the center. It's very bright. You can see it a bit on the projector. So I may want to start toning down some of my lights. So maybe light 1's intensity is at 75%. Light 2, which is on the left side, light 2, which is right in the middle, I'm going to leave at, I'll set it to 85. And then my light on the left side, I'll set to 50. All right, that really murkied it up a bit. So I'm going to go back to light 2 and set this to maybe 110. And then light 1, which is on the left, I'll set that to 80. And then my original light, I'll put this back up to 75. Okay, now a common thing you'll see too is if you have an orange light in the scene, it always helps to have like a blue light as well. So I'm going to go with more of a blue light over here. And what I should get is a nice little contrasting color here where I have like this blue and orangey color. So that looks pretty good. The lighting in here looks pretty decent. Now I could turn off my cylinder and then turn on the rest of these. And then if I were to render it, I should get something that's pretty close to the lighting that I'm going to need for this. I may need to boost some of my values, maybe the intensity's up a little bit, but I'm much closer now, much faster than I would have been otherwise. You can already see how much longer this is taking to render, but if we go back to these first shots, we're going to get much better imagery. And obviously this is something you want to be aware of how long things are taking, because when you render your stuff out, it's going to take some time to render it all out, right? Cool. I don't have anything fancy on there. Nope. So it's all just basic stuff. All right. So once you have your items set up, once you have your cameras, your lights, your background, whatever background you're using, you'll want to set up your camera. So I'm going to create a camera, and I'm going to look through the camera and set up what does it look like right at the start of this shot. Okay, so these are my products really close to this. You can see if I get the beer bottle in here that I may see some of this. I want to fix that if I do. I may see some of that. I want to fix that if I do. Okay, in this case I'm just ignoring the beer bottle. I'll put these like about here. That's good. Okay, so there's where my camera is. I may want to adjust my focal length. That's good. All right, and then I'm going to jump out of the camera so that I can animate it. Okay, so you may think that you want to be in the camera to set it up so you can animate the kind of sweep of it, but it's much easier if you jump out of the camera so you can actually see the sweep. So once I have that set up initially, I'm just going to group the camera to itself. And when I do that, then I can take the pivot for the camera and move the pivot. So I just hit L, and I'm basically going to move this right to the center. So here's where all my items are. Oops, right there. Right about there. And that should be good. Okay. So now that I have that, I'm going to animate this null instead of animating the camera. And what I should be able to do is create this nice sweep. So just so to preview it, as I animate that rotate, why aren't you rotating? Oh, I'm still in my pivot mode. There we go. As I animate this rotating, you'll see how nicely that camera is just rotating from one side to the other. If I tried to move the camera and animate it like that, it would create this very like choppy look to it. So I'm going to grab my null, I'm going to set my rotations at the beginning of this. This is a 4-second animation, so we need 120 frames. And so now I'll go to the end, set my keyframes, and then of course preview it, make sure it looks good here, and then jump into the camera, and then verify that it looks good there. Okay, and you can see how that camera, it's pivoting perfectly around that area. Now I do see right at the end of this a big block where I'm missing my backdrop. So I need to jump out of the camera, and I need to fix that. So I'm just going to scale this up crazy big, and then grab that plane, and maybe just take the top edge here, and pull it up even more. Now I can jump back into the camera. Yep, I don't see that anymore, so that's good. All right, and then a couple things I want to throw onto my final render when I do this is I want to make this a ambient occlusion on here so that we get the nice contact shadows. And for this one, we really don't need to touch anything else. If you wanted to go a bit further into what your stuff is, you could add things like caustics. On this bottle here, that little green that's casting, that's the light coming through the green bottle and then coloring the ground with that green. You could add, where's the other one? Global illumination, which will create some more bounce light inside the scene. That would again make it look nicer, but it's going to take longer. For this, we're going to stick to the bare minimum. So once I have that, I'm just going to set up my animation. So I'm going to do all my frames, 0 to 120, 960 by 540. Yes. Under anti-aliasing, I'll set this to Mitchell. And then that should be it. Oops, under save, I have to tell it where I'm going to save this. So I'm going to save this as a name.number.extension, so that very bottom one, like we did before. And this will go into our product inside our renders. And I'll call this Arkona product anim save. And then I save my scene, I hit Shift R, and then I just let it chug along. Now, just like I said before, this part is going to take a long time to render out. So if you see something right away, like frame 1, the texture's not there, the colors aren't what you want, stop it right away, fix it, and then go back to what you were doing. Right, so that's going along. Obviously, my products are not all lined up inside here, so I'm just going to stop that. All right, so that will be your animation one. And then for your still image, you're just going to not do an animation. So when you go to your output, you'll set that to a current frame. You'll set your output here to 2400 by 3000, because again, this is going to be something for a magazine. And then you can see where these bars are right here and right there. That's what it's going to look like. So I need to, get out of my camera. There we go. Make a new camera so I don't ruin that one. There we go. I undid that on accident. So 3000. Okay, and now I'm going to set up what I want this to look like for my ad. Now you may want to move your items around. I may want to put some of these items a little bit further, closer to the camera, further apart, whatever it is, just to kind of fit them because it's a different format. So you have to kind of think about that too. I also want to be aware of that top piece so that I don't, see the top of this. You don't want to be too far away because that looks weird, right? You can't see the product. You can't be too close because then you can't see everything. You may want to get on an angle. You may want to, tweak how you're laying the thing out. And then when you're happy with it, then you'll just hit the render button after relabeling this so we don't overwrite the last one. Product still, there we go. And then let that chug along too. And then your last step, just bring it into Photoshop after you save it, put a little title on the top of what the product is. So if it's Dove, it'll be Dove. If it's oils, you'll put oils or something, whatever the name of your product is. Yes, sir?
So this is kind of like the environment project, how we're turning it in Photoshop.
Well, you're going to have a still from Photoshop, and then you'll have an animation. And the animation part, you've done that before going into After Effects with the animation, making into a movie. I don't need to go over that.
Oh, yeah.
Okay? And then obviously you want to keep your stuff organized. I haven't kept this organized just because I'm trying to go pretty quick with this. But all your materials on the bottom should be labeled. All your items over here should be labeled. All your stuff should be on layers. So make sure you do that as well. And that should finish up this assignment. Okay? So by now you know how to do a product. You know how to do a label. You know how to do a liquid inside it, lighting the materials, rendering out the animation. That should be good. Cool. Questions on this yet? Yes, sir.